All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our first YouTube Live for our Friday informational webinars. I'm Dr. Grandela from ViewFinder Low Vision. We are doing these informational webinars once a month, the last Friday of every month, as a way to spread education and awareness back to the community. We find that a lot of our patients who come into the office have lots of questions that they feel have never been answered adequately, or they just need a refresher on the things that they've learned about. If you check out our Facebook page, you'll see we've done some previous live videos on Facebook, but we decided to move to the YouTube platform for those who are not logged into Facebook or not interested in making an account, and we will double post these over to our Facebook page. So again, I'm Dr. Grandela. I appreciate the time you guys are taking to come out today and listen. Um, we're here in my home today instead of in the Mesa office where we would usually shoot these videos. So you'll notice the background will be different next time. Unfortunately, I've been sick today. And so there's a few instruments I would love to show you. We're going to describe them instead. I didn't want to go into the office and spread any contagions. So today we're going to talk a little bit about visual field loss. Visual field loss is something that a lot of people go through. A lot of people don't realize that they have it initially, and you can be very impacted in your day-to-day life, and in the long term can lead to total blindness depending on the condition that you have. So it's a very serious matter. It's definitely one that, if you have it, you should know about it, know what you can do to prevent it from getting worse. I wanted to share a PowerPoint with you as well today, but it looks like YouTube Live doesn't allow me to share my screen. I'm going to do some further investigations. This is kind of a learning process as we go. I'm not a big YouTuber at this point, but we're going to find that probably each month I'm going to find out some new trick that I can do. So bear with me as I learn to be a little more tech savvy here. So visual field loss, this is a symptom that can come from a variety of conditions. The ones that are most famous would likely be glaucoma, diabetes, retinitis pigmentosa, optic nerve atrophy and optic nerve hypoplasia, and then stroke and tumors. There are many other ones that can contribute, and there's many different kinds of visual field loss. Most of the time, when we think about visual field loss, in the case of glaucoma or retinitis pigmentosa, we're thinking of someone who maintains central vision just fine, but it's their exterior vision, their peripheral or side vision, that gets lost first. And that can come in a variety of ways. It can come at the very edge of your vision and work its way in. It can start somewhere in the middle and spread out farther. In glaucoma, for example, we often find it starts somewhere in the middle and it starts to spread in kind of an arc pattern. And so you may have this area of loss right in the middle of your vision, but be able to see on the other side of it. Retinitis pigmentosa is typically much farther out and slowly works its way in and in over your lifespan, but may leave little islands of vision way, way out to the side. Again, this is all very patient dependent. So you may have two people with retinitis pigmentosa and have two very different presentations of what goes on. With cases like diabetes, it's much more likely that the vision loss is from either a retinal detachment or laser surgery, laser therapy. In diabetes, what often happens when the sugar level goes uncontrolled is that blood vessels will start to leak inside the eyeball. So you have this bloody retina that starts to grow all these little new blood vessels because the blood is leaking. It doesn't get where it's supposed to go. So the body's trying to be productive and grow new blood vessels to go where they need to be. But these new blood vessels leak as well. And so this ends up causing retinal detachments, causing hemorrhages, leakages of blood throughout the eye. It can do quite a bit to ruin your vision. If you have a retinal detachment, this can be big or small, but that's where the inside layer of the eye starts to peel away from the outer layers. And that could be because blood got underneath those layers and pushed them apart, or it could be because those new little blood vessels that are growing latch onto that layer and pull it up. It's very important if we ever experience a retinal detachment to go in and see a ocular disease specialist right away. Typically, if you see an optometrist and they find a retinal detachment, they're going to refer you on pretty quickly to a retinal specialist. In some cases, they'll want you to go within 24 hours. Other cases, it'll be within 30 days or 2 weeks. It'll depend a little bit on what's going on. You can have retinal detachments for lots of other reasons, like a car crash and things like that. Again, we have other conditions like stroke, where we can have an area of vision that is lost very suddenly. And so the thumbnail for this video shows what's called a hemianopsia. A hemianopsia is when you lose all of one half of your vision, and typically happens in strokes, tumors, and other neurological conditions. It will happen in both eyes. So on your left eye, let's say you have a right-sided stroke, you would have a left-sided field loss because it crosses through in the brain there. So your left eye would miss everything from the middle over to the left, and your right eye would miss everything from the middle over to the left. And this can be a very sudden loss. There are plenty of patients I've had who say they, woke up from their stroke and had lost that vision. Other patients who it was a more of a gradual change. They lost patches of it at different strokes and things like that. But this can be very devastating. You can imagine what it would be like if you're walking down, New York City street or something like that, and you've lost half of your vision. Walk right into people. Think about being in the grocery store and walking through the fruit aisle, and they have all those displays out there. You might not even see the stack of oranges that's on display. Run right in them and knock the whole thing over. That's going to hurt for one, but it's going to be embarrassing for two. And this is something that can stop you from driving. You can imagine how fearful you would be if you had lost a significant portion of your vision. And you're worried about pedestrians, you're worried about cars turning, you're worried about the passengers that are with you being safe while you're driving. And losing your ability to drive in a place like Arizona can be absolutely devastating. Somewhere like Chicago or New York, there are options to take a subway, to take a train, to take a bus. And there are bus systems here in the Phoenix area, and there are other transportation groups like Dial a Ride that you can take. But those often leave you waiting for hours on one end or the other, and sometimes the cost can be prohibitive. You can imagine how difficult it is for someone who maybe wants to take one of these services to see their doctor, and the doctor's at 11, and they could be picked up anytime between 8 and 10 for the half an hour car ride over to the doctor's office. And then after the visit, they could be picked up anywhere from, let's say it's an hour long visit, they could be picked up anywhere from 1 to 3 afterwards. Sorry about that. I didn't realize my phone was still on. Turn that off so we don't get any more buzzing today. Okay. So, public transit is a great thing to have, but if it's not a very high functioning level of transportation, that can be difficult to give up your license and try to get around. Otherwise, you may rely on friends or family. There's definitely ways to do it, but it's a big adaptation to your lifestyle. So walking gets interrupted, driving gets interrupted. Imagine trying to read, having lost the portion of your vision. If you lose it on the left-hand side, and we start from left to right, every time that you get to the end of the line and you try to come back to the start, you're not going to be able to see the start of the line. You have to actually look beyond the line, and it will start to pop in your side vision a little bit. That's really frustrating, and that requires a lot of practice and training to learn to read again. The opposite, imagine if it's on the right-hand side, and as you read left to right, every word on the right isn't there. And you have to look farther to the right to get to the next word. And when I say you're looking farther to that side, this is a trick that we do with a lot of conditions called eccentric viewing. So let's imagine for a moment that I have an area of vision loss. In the medical field, we call that a scotoma. Scotomas can be absolute, where you're blind in that area, or they can be relative, where it's just blurry, muddied up in that area. This is something that it's not like if you have an absolute defect that it's totally black. It's more like there's just nothing there. There's no feedback to you. Your brain will actually fill that in with background noise so that you don't pay attention to the fact that nothing's there. Which that you can imagine how absolutely infuriating that is to not even know where the area of your vision loss is. Um, so let's imagine that we have this scotoma that sits right about here, okay, and I'm trying to read along, and everything that's on that right-hand side for me is being blocked. What I have to do to get this out of the way is I can look my eyes higher than my target, and that defect moves with my eyes. So a lot of people who have this kind of condition will turn their head and they'll try to see from the side and go, okay, I can sort of see it from one side or the other. That's not the best way to do it. What you want to think about doing is, if your target is my face, for example, and the scotoma is covering a part of my face, you might try to look above my face. And as you look up, that defect moves up. And then with your side vision, you would appreciate what's going on down there, where you might look to the side of my face or to the other or down. So if something's on your right hand side, if you look more to the left, that's going to push it into the center. So you actually want to look more to the right than you should have to. That's a tricky concept to get. So if you wanted to look right at my face and the defect's on the right, blocking the right side of my face, you look maybe over where my ear should be. You might not be able to see it. Look over where my ear should be, and that defect moves over, and you're now appreciating this with side vision. Imagine doing something your whole life that's simple and easy, like vision, and then you're 50, 60, 70 years old, and suddenly I'm telling you, you have to look at things in a brand new way. This absolutely takes practice and time to learn how to do. And if it's happening just in one eye, you may not need to do it, except when you're at the doctor's office. If it's in both eyes, that's where you're much more likely to kind of pick a clock hour around that target and say, every time I look at something, if I look down at 7 o'clock, it's dead on for me. Everybody's a little bit different. I've had patients who look straight up and they talk to me just like that, because that bottom vision for them is much more stable and they can see me quite a bit better that way. So this is one of many different ways to manage with this. Those who are losing it from the outside in and get kind of a tunnel vision may find that they scan their eyes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Um, Sorry, I've got a staff member texting me here. Um, as you scan back and forth and back and forth, what you're going to do is take that little area of vision that you have and move it over that field. So if you imagine everything outside of my hands was blurred or black, we could have a very clear image in here. In fact, I have patients who are 20/20, but they have a field of vision that's 20 degrees, whereas a normal unimpeded field is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 120. If your field is down to 20 degrees, that's actually a cause for legal blindness certification. So what you would do is move those eyes back and forth and find all those missing things that you're not getting right away. Scanning as well is going to take a lot of practice to do, but it can be done, and there are many people who are successful with it. These are very basic ways to manage with that vision loss, and depending on the type you have, there are different things you're going to do. So can we prevent vision loss from happening? In many cases, we can. Can we recover it after it's been lost? In many cases, we cannot. So glaucoma, stroke, diabetes, these are all permanent forms of damage in most cases. I'm never going to say always, because the body has always surprised the medical field in what it's able to heal. Especially things like neurological conditions. Your best luck is the first 6 months to a year to get some of that feeling and neural connection back. So we do have patients who come in with a full loss of their field, and over a year may get some of that back. It's very hard to predict when that's going to happen. what we recommend is doing occupational and physical therapy geared towards using those functions that you're losing and try and communicate to the brain how much you still need that behavior. That being said, so if we can't recover it 100%, what can we do to prevent it? In many cases, this requires us to go to the doctor on a regular basis. In the case of diabetes, we need to monitor blood sugar. In the case of stroke, it's very often related to high blood pressure. The higher your blood pressure is, the more risk of stroke that you have. For patients who have degenerative myopia, they're at a higher risk for retinal detachment. Probably don't want to play contact sports. If you get hit in one of those sports, someone with degenerative myopia is much more likely to have a detachment than other people. And glaucoma, if you do your yearly ocular health exam, part of what the doctor is going to do is dilate your eyes to look at the nerve and tell you, does the nerve look healthy? Does it look like it's pale and thin? Pale and thin indicates that things are dying off or in risk of dying off. They're also going to check your pressure. That's different than your blood pressure, and it's not 100% linked. There are links that they've found in research, but you can't say that because my blood pressure is high, my eye pressure is always high as well. Doesn't work hand in hand like that. Blood eye pressure will change throughout the day. It's usually worse during the early morning hours, I want to say, when you're sleeping. So many doctors will have you come and will take your pressure a few times throughout the day. They might have you come in the morning and then leave and then come back in the midday and leave and then come back in the afternoon to get a really good feel for it. What's the level of change in your eye pressure? But most doctors are going to find that it's pretty consistent over a period of time, that you tend to range in, let's say you range from 20 to 30. If you're over 20, we know you're in a risky area. If you're up to 30, it's very likely that there's glaucoma damage going on. Most doctors want to get you down somewhere between 10 and 15. That being said, there are kinds of glaucoma where you can be at pressures that low and still have damage. The root source of the damage in glaucoma comes from the pressure being really high in the eyeball, pushing on the eyeball. Imagine the air inside of a balloon, pushing on that balloon, causing it to expand, trying to find a way out. And the only way out in the eyeball, one of the easiest ones for it to push on there, is the optic nerve. There is a drainage system in the front part of the eye, and sometimes the blockage in that drain is what causes the pressure to go up. Sometimes you have a large cataract that covers the drain and pushes the pressure up. You can get punched and have glaucoma. You can have diabetes and have resultant glaucoma. You can be born with kinds of glaucoma. So there's no guarantee who, when, or why you have your particular kind. There are genetic links, though. If you have glaucoma, your brother and sister are more likely to have glaucoma. But it's not a guarantee. It's not a hard and fast thing. So when you go for your yearly health exam and they measure your pressure, if they find that you're reaching to those higher numbers, they're going to take a very good look with a few scans and pictures at how much damage is happening to that nerve. They'll do these same kinds of tests for people with stroke, for people with optic nerve swelling and inflammation. We want to see if we took, let's say you're 80 years old, and if we take a picture of everybody who's 80 years old who's taken this test, we can find averages for what's a normal, healthy nerve. So when they take your picture, they compare you to that average and tell you, are you inside it, outside it, above it, below it? And then what they want to do is check you over time. It may be every 3 months, every 6 months, every year, depending on the level of damage they can appreciate already. So that's another test that they'll do. So not only will they check your pressure, they'll check the health of your optic nerve, and then they're going to want to check your visual field and see, do you have an area that's very obvious and present there? That's a way to tell how much damage has already occurred. So the prevention there is to take drops, surgery, or laser therapy to either open up these drainage areas in the eye, or to use those drops to decrease the amount of production inside the eye to make the fluids that fill the eye, and one way or the other, lower that pressure. have a balloon that's not pushing quite so much on that nerve. That's the most guaranteed way we can find to decrease the progression of glaucoma and prevent total blindness. So to recap that a little bit again, diabetes, we want to make sure our sugars are in control. Things like stroke, we want to look at high blood pressure. Things like glaucoma, we want to look at ocular pressure. And there's, again, a variety of different conditions. One that I do want to bring up that actually has a cure is Tosa, a specific gene version of it can have a medical treatment. It's a gene therapy called Luxturna, where a little virus is injected into your body and goes through your DNA and swaps out the bad gene that's causing your retinitis pigmentosa and then swaps in a good healthy gene. And by doing that, they can prevent the progression and possibly recoup some of the lost vision. So the sooner you do it, the better. So anybody who has an inherited retinal disease or inherited nerve disease or something like that, it's a great idea to consider genetic testing. Even if they don't have a cure for you today, there may be something that they develop down the road. There may be study trials they're doing right now. A lot of the work in finding cures for these uncurable conditions is in stem cells and gene therapy. And if you go to clinicaltrials.gov, that's where you'll find a lot of the information you need to find who's doing active trials, who are the people that they're recruiting, how can you become involved if you want to be one of the participating study members. It's a good resource. And if nothing else, you can find out, you can search your diagnosis and see what are the studies that are currently being done. Do they have a timetable where they expect results? I know if somebody in my family had a condition, I would want to know, and what's the chance in 5 years, 10 years, even that there could be a treatment for this? It's hard to say. We've got one gene therapy out. We can prove that it works and that it helps. So it's a matter of figuring out how can we replace genes for other conditions that have a link like that. For those that are not inherited conditions, that's where stem cells, the ability to regrow the tissue, is what we're really pushing for. And they've got a hard road ahead of them to regrow nervous tissue, to regrow retinal tissue. But we're hopeful that that's going to improve. So in the meantime, what do? If you're already working on preventing it, and if there's no hope of stopping it completely, or maybe you're not eligible for the cures that are out there, what can you do right now to help yourself with visual field loss? One of the great things that you can do is field enhancement. So there's a few different ways we can do that, techniques and instruments and tools we can use to try and get back some of those lost areas of vision. So one of the easiest concepts to think about is a reverse telescope. Most of the time you would use the telescope, put it up over one eye, and think about a pirate who's up on the crow's nest looking at an island saying land ho. He is seeing a picture that is zoomed in and closer and has a smaller area of vision. That's not what we want. We want to turn that telescope around, and instead of zooming things in, we're going to zoom things away. And in that area of vision, we'll actually find a much bigger picture than we would naturally. So you can imagine a scenario, you walk into a grocery store or get off a bus at a bus station or enter into a shopping mall. And with a limited field of view, you see things that are directly ahead of you, but you don't get the wide out picture out there. If you were to use a 2 times telescope to back that image 2 times farther away, you'll have about a 2 times larger area that you can appreciate. So this is very useful for, let's say you get off the bus and you're trying to decide which way is the McDonald's that you wanted to go to. This is maybe not a great example, but you could use that reverse telescope and get an expanded field and scan back and forth till you see the red and yellow that you want to go to. So that's one example. Another thing that you could do is prism. So a prism is a lens that's thicker on one side and thinner on the other, and it's used to shift an image. So for people who are cross-eyed, we often use prisms to shift the eyes and shift the image into a place where they no longer have double vision to alleviate some of the stress they have. In visual field loss, we're instead shifting the image that we've lost into the view of the retina or nerve that is still healthy and still functioning. So an example, again, of let's say we have that right-sided loss, I would put a prism on my right eye in such a way that it pulls some of that image over. Now, the disadvantage to this system, let's say we're doing it on both eyes so that we're still equally aligned, and everything on that right-hand side is going to be shifted over a little bit. That's also going to cause everything on the left-hand side to shift over a little bit. So if you have a 20-degree field, you'll still have a 20-degree field at the end of it, but you may be a little bit more centered than you were before. You may find that it's easier to read if that's the particular activity you're trying to do. For someone who has complete field loss on that one side, we often do prisms above and below their vision. This is called a Peli prism. It's a little bit different than using what I just described. It's called a yoked prism. So yoked prism will not give you any additional area, but Peli prism will. And the way that this works is because it's above and below your fixation, looking straight out ahead is going to allow you the same vision you have always. But in the areas of the prism above and below, you will see images that have been lost out to that side. So a great example here is walking through the grocery store again or down the street, and we've lost vision on this side. So we're going to run into somebody with that right shoulder, and that right shoulder starts to get bruised and bruised over time. If we have a Peli prism on above and below, what that's going to show us is in that area, it's going to pull an image over to the bottom and pull an image over to the top. So you're going to kind of have three different visions in that one pair of lenses. This is going to allow you to say, oh, I've got movement on that side. I see somebody's head and somebody's hips over there. I'm going to redirect my gaze to better appreciate what's going on. And this allows me to not run in with that shoulder. This can be a little hard to get used to at first, but for many people, this saves them a lot of toe stubs and a lot of headaches running into cabinets and things like that. Because again, it's just a set of little lenses ground into your main pair of glasses. You have vision straight ahead, and then we've added in this additional vision above and below that's pulled in from the side. So prisms can be a great tool, and this can be done in any direction. It doesn't have to be right or left. It can be up and down. In fact, there are very specialty lenses where you may have a prism in all directions, pulling the entire image in and allowing you to appreciate things that are happening outside a very small field of view. So it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's very helpful to many people, but it does take practice and does take training to use. So we've talked about lens options. Another lens option is not as common, very similar to the reverse telescope, is a very strong nearsighted lens. So if you don't know, when an optometrist is putting lenses in front of you and asking you one or two, he or she is often putting lenses that are positive in power, which means that they're convex and they're kind of curvy on the outside, or they're minus in power, which means they're concave and they cave inwards in the lens. So thicker on the top, thinner in the middle. So a very strong minus or concave lens will minify images, similar to what a reverse telescope will do. So some people will find that using a very strong lens like that, maybe on a keychain or a chain that they can put up really quick like a monocle, allows them to back out that image very similar to a reverse telescope and appreciate a larger area view than they would otherwise. Everyone's going to be a little bit different. If you have some loss of clarity, telescopes and minus lenses may be a harder thing to appreciate. You may back it away too far and find that, well, yeah, I can see a larger area, but I can't tell anything that's going on in there. And that's where electronics can be very, very helpful. There are a very few devices out there that have some kind of a visual field enhancement. One thing I would love to see is an electronic version of the Peli prisms, where we could have a camera above and below fixation and actually pull a clear digital image above and below. That would be a wonderful thing. So if anybody's an engineer or a software guy and wants to work on that, let's talk. But what we have today in one of our products, the Iris Vision Live, is what's called the RP mode or retinitis pigmentosa mode. And so you have a few options with this particular mode. The Iris Vision is a big pair of kind of virtual reality goggles. It's usually used for people who have central vision loss to magnify things outside of that area. But if you're someone who has peripheral vision loss, there's one of these modes that will, again, back out the image and allow you to appreciate a larger area. However, you're viewing that on a little screen and you have options to change focus and clarity so that we won't lose as much of the detail as perhaps we would have with the telescope or with the large power lens. So these are a few of the visual tools that we can use. And for some people, they're going to be very successful. Some of you may listen to this and go, I would never use something like that. And that's okay. What we want to talk about are the things that you're going to use. So outside of this visual field loss, what are some of the other things we can talk about to bring back our ability to be independent, to bring back what we can do? So there are lots of sight substitution tools, and that's something we talk about quite a bit. Sight substitution means we're using a different sense of our body instead of using our vision to accomplish things. So if you have an area of vision loss that prevents you from reading, you may find that audiobooks are a much easier thing to access, to be efficient with it. You may be able to read, but find it tiresome and fatiguing. Arizona does have a public library that has free audiobooks for those with vision impairment. We hand out applications for that all the time. Additional resources are what are called OCR devices, or optical character recognition devices. These are devices that will take a picture of a text, an image, and try to recognize the letters and numbers that are in there and read it out loud to you. So a great example of that is the Orcam My Eye. Orcam is a company that developed this little camera that attaches to the side of your glasses and takes a picture, recognizes text, and reads it out loud to you. It can do a few other things like recognizing faces and money and things like that. But there are several other products that will do this as well, but none that are, portable like the Orcam. Orcam is pretty tiny. It's about the size of a thumb drive. It magnetically clips onto a little clip that goes on your glasses. Very easy as far as portability. Unlike Iris Vision, which is very big and a little bit heavy, Orcam is very light. It's not as obtrusive, so people aren't going to notice it as much. But there are other devices that will do that. If anybody has used a video magnifier, a large TV screen with camera associated with it, there are a few models of those that also have an OCR feature in it. So if you're looking for magnification and an option to listen to things, a magnifier with OCR can be a really great option for you. That being said, there is a way for you to do it pretty much free. If you have an iPhone or Android or a tablet, you can use what's called Seeing AI or Be My Eyes, or there's a few others like Ira, SuperSense, are absolutely free. Download onto your phone. If you have Android or Apple, you may find that some are available. All do just about the same thing. Either a robot or a human will look out of your camera on your device, recognize text, and read it out loud to you. Now, not enough can be said for the human touch. That's something that you find in Be My Eyes and Ira, where you have either a volunteer or a paid contractor, respectively, who looks at that camera and will either talk to you about the images, the scenery that you're pointing the camera to, or will read out documents. And the great thing there is, say you have a newspaper. Sometimes the robots don't understand that you have different columns for different articles, and they might read just across the whole thing, mixing it up. They're getting a lot better about that. So that's not always true. But a human would be able to look at it and go, okay, we've got 4 different articles. These are the headlines. Which ones are you interested in? Similarly, you could have a human walk through a Target or something like that with you on one of these applications and be able to read prices out to you and things like that. You can do that with a robot, so it'll take a little more finagling, a little more practice. But this is absolutely something you can do that's free. Unless you don't have a smartphone or a smart device, that's really the purchase price you'll have to make for it. But many of us are walking around with this in our pockets already. You can also find a lot of these features on computers. So there are a few softwares out there like JAWS that can allow you to make everything on your computer audible, to narrate out the page to you and give voice commands back and forth. Windows 10 and Mac have done a really good job of starting to incorporate a lot of those voice features. So if you have trouble on the computer, you might consider going into your settings and going to, it'll either be called ease of access or accessibility, and looking at the narrator and dictation options there, where it might be called text to speech. I have patients who are completely blind or nearly so, who will still use a smartphone, still use a computer, still go from place to place because they do a lot of things with sight substitution. Now, that's just the audio side of sight substitution. You can also use your sense of touch. And the way to easily think about this is with an orientation and mobility cane, which is one of those long red and white tipped canes. These are used as a tactile feedback. You sweep that cane back and forth in an arc in front of you, touching the ground, to be aware of changes in elevation, cracks in the road, obstacles in your way. And this is an extremely useful tool. You do not have to be completely blind or legally blind or any level of blind to warrant an orientation cane. What you have to be is someone who has a hard time walking around, who finds that they're tripping on things, stumbling on things, who gets upset because there's no way for people to know that they have a vision impairment and they run into people all the time and things like that. That's where an orientation cane is going to be very useful to allow you to be independent in your navigation, and advocate for yourself a little bit. Nobody's going to have a question when they look at you with that cane of why you're bumping into things, why you might stand too close to somebody. The cane makes it obvious that there's a visual impairment. In many, many conditions, there's no way to look at you and know that you have a visual impairment. Oftentimes, we upgrade from using a long cane to using a guide dog. And it's kind of done in that flow. They want you to be successful as someone who uses a cane before they upgrade you to having a dog. A dog is quite a bit more commitment. You don't have to feed your cane. You don't have to take your cane out to poop. Your cane doesn't need a special seat or anything like that when you go places. Your cane doesn't, get excited when people come to touch it and things like that. So it's quite a bit more work to have a guide dog. So that's something to definitely consider. But there are many people who are successful using a service dog and have found again that it opens up their ability to navigate independently. So I definitely recommend that if you find your visual field gets in your way of being mobile, being independent, and navigating, that can be a great resource. Using a cane, using a guide dog, or even when you go out with friends, to teach them to allow you to hold onto their elbow and walk about a step behind them. This is what we call a sighted guide. A sighted guide, a step ahead of you, gives you a little bit of time to react if there's a sudden car that pulls in front of you, or if we have to squeeze into a narrow hallway or something like that. Using that technique can be very helpful. Instead of standing side by side with people, you have somebody who's a little bit in front and can kind of let you know, are there obstacles coming up? Is there a step that we have to go down? So those, again, are using our sense of touch and our communication with others to be able to better navigate. Now, somebody dropped into the comments here using Lyft or Uber transportation. That's a great thing to talk about. So let's circle back for a moment to driving. We had talked about driving being something we lose quite a bit when we're losing our visual field. And that's because, so driving requirements will change state by state. Okay, in the state of Arizona and most other states, there is a visual field requirement. Many states have a requirement of 105, 100, 120 degrees. This is something that we have to show with a visual field test as a doctor to sign off on somebody's license. So in Arizona, it's 105 degrees. You have to have at least 35 from the center into your nose, and then at least 70 from the center out to your ear. So 105, and if you were someone with no visual field loss, you'd probably have in the neighborhood of 120 up to 150. It depends on how prominent your brow is, how large your nose is, cheekbones, and things like that. If your eyes are very sunken, you'll have less visual field. or if you've had an eyelid that started drooping, that will cut off some of those areas, and it's a good reason to have an eye lift to give you some of that vision back. But so if you're someone who doesn't have 105 degrees of visual field, there are very few ways for us to get that back in a way that you can drive. One of the ways that we can do that is to do Prisms. And that's usually only when we've lost just a little portion of that nasal field. So when we do that, again, we're putting prisms above and below fixation. And instead of setting these prisms directly across to what's ever missing on that side, these ones are angled and they're picking up what's in the center. So there's no real specification about how high or low your visual field has to go, just how wide it has to go. In some states, it is mandated you have at least 20 degrees above and below. Generally, the rule of thumb is we want to see about 20 degrees, and we want to definitely see that there are points above and below the horizontal midline. I've had patients before who had a full field, but they only had it directly above the midline. Well, that means that they could miss things that are lower down on the road, like a small dog or a small child. And that's a very risky thing. So in some cases, we could use a yoked prism to push that field into the place that it needs to be. More often, we're going to use a prism for somebody who's lost about 10 to 20 degrees of visual field. That's pretty close to center. The prism is not going to give us something that's way, way out here if we're missing that. That's pretty hard to do. And again, once you've had training in that prism, we're going to want to show it on a visual field test that you can still make out the required areas. Not only that, but it's our procedure at ViewFinder that once you're trained in using that prism, you also need to do a behind the wheel test to prove that not only do you have the vision there, but that you can get in a car and use it appropriately. I'm not a driving instructor. I'm not going to get behind the wheel with you. So it's very unfair for me to hand out, license paperwork for somebody if they're unproven. And we only do that the first year. If you're wearing a prism and you pass that the first year, we just want to check you every year afterwards to make sure we don't have a significant progression in your vision loss. So there is some opportunity there for those who've lost a little bit of visual field to get their driving privileges back. Now let's keep going to Lyft and Uber and these other transportation modes. For those who have lost a significant portion of vision, let's say you're down to 30 degrees or so of vision, there's not really a good way for us to expand that field back out to make you eligible for driving. So how do you get to work? How do you get back and forth, place to place? There are several services in the Arizona area. So Lyft and Uber, that's a commercial services that we all know. Those can be expensive. If you're racking up $15, $20 every time you take a ride, that can be pretty expensive. But you know that your Lyft or Uber is going to be really on time. It's usually a wait of 10 to 15 minutes, sometimes less than that. If you program your rides ahead of time, they can be really punctual, which is a great thing. I've used that a few times going back and forth to the airport. There are other services, though, like Dial-A-Ride, which is a public service. In Arizona, it will depend kind of city by city who the driving transportation provider is and what the cost associated with it is and the amount of time that you'll have to wait for pickups and drop-offs. Sometimes they're going to pick up multiple people. So you may be one of 2 to 4 people who's riding in this shuttle together. And so you have to budget time to go to where these other people are being picked up and dropped off. But the cost associated can be free up to, about $4 to $7. Again, that will vary a little bit on distance, on the city that you're in to use that service. This is something that you want to contact the Phoenix Metro Authority about. If you have a vision impairment, they're going to want to see exam records and things like that. They can get you discounted rates to use those services and help you set up all the numbers, all the programs and IDs and things like that you need to use on these public transit systems. Again, there are buses and things like that that you can use. And if you live in a larger city like Chicago, it can be much easier to get around. I worked at the Chicago Lighthouse before I was in Phoenix, and I had patients who are completely blind with no light perception at all, who would take the train system by using Google Maps and by using an orientation cane or a dog to get back and forth. So you really have to look at, in the area that you live in, what are the resources that are available. And of course, we can always have friends and family and things like that do drop-offs, carpool to work, but we're pushing for independent ways to do that. So that's definitely something we can do. I have had patients who hire a driver or have their work hire a driver. Maybe they're a sales rep who has to make lots of stops and things like that and is bringing in, a worthwhile amount to accommodate them. That's a good discussion for the HR department and the ADA to look at what we need to do to get somebody accommodated in the workplace to be successful in their career, but not be an undue burden on the company as well, because nobody wants to do that. I would highly recommend, if you're somebody who's working or going to school, or you've stopped those things only for vision's sake, that you consider talking to the Rehabilitative Services Administration here in Arizona. This is a department that's under the Department of Economic Security, and we can provide those numbers to you at ViewFinder. If you call Rehabilitative Services, they will want to assign you a case counselor to work on, are we going back to school? Are we going back to work? Are we trying to keep a job we already have, but we need the proper accommodations? I often work hand in hand with them to give an examination and say, this is what a person needs, X, Y, and Z, in order to continue doing their job, whether it be at a computer or whether it be a stop-to-stop kind of situation. And every case is absolutely different. So in our peer groups, we often talk about transportation services. People will bring up GoGo Grandparent, which is another option, especially out in Sun City and Sun City West, where they will help you call Lyft and Uber if you have a hard time seeing your phone to do those things. Again, you can use the phone with auditory feedback to make those apps work. But if you find that that's just not what you want to do, you're not a smartphone person, or it's just too difficult to upgrade your phone to those settings, there are services out there that you can call and schedule your ride. They often have kind of a finder's fee associated to it. So again, take your time to figure out in your particular area what are the best economic ways to get around, what are the fastest ways to get around, and that will give you a little leeway. And how you want to go to the grocery store, how you want to get to the doctor's office, how you want to go to a friend's party across town, those kinds of different things. So visual field loss is a very serious, very life upending symptom to have. And it comes from, again, a variety of different conditions. We want to try and catch this as soon as we can to prevent it from getting worse. And that's really the best thing you can do. So if you're at a level that you've progressed already, let's work with you where you are and find out the tools and resources you need now. But if you're somebody who's just getting started down one of these pathways and you're concerned about what it's going to do, the most important thing is to get in and see your specialist, your ocular disease specialist, whether it's a glaucoma or a retina guy, on a regular basis. However often that doctor needs to see you for pressure checks or retinal photos, go there and do that, because you will regret losing vision. You will not regret the time you spent in an office to keep your vision. That's how I feel about it. So I want to thank everyone who turned out today. We again talked about several different features, items, tools, and techniques that we can use to help our vision. I'm more than happy to discuss this in further with anybody who comes into the office. We can do that over the phone. We can do telehealth visits if you just want to have a counsel and conversation about it. If you need help finding the contact information, a lot of that's available on our website. We have a 30-page document of everybody who does anything with low vision in Arizona. And so that's a great resource to download and keep available. We try to keep that updated once a year. So I think that's actually something we need to do this year, make sure all our phone numbers are still working. But that's a great thing to look into. So if you go to viewfinderlowvision.com, you go to our tools and downloads area, you'll find that 30-page resource guide. It has areas for transportation, has areas for vocational rehabilitation, education. Highly recommend you take a look at those things. Thank you so much for turning out today. I appreciate your time and willingness to listen to me. I'll look forward to seeing you again. Our next meeting will be the last Friday in March, which will be, let me pull my calendar down here, the 26th of March. And so that's every last Friday of the month from 3 to 4. We'll do an instructional video. I'll send out an email about that usually earlier in the same week to let you know the topic that we're working on. And I will also double post this video over to Facebook. So you're welcome to watch this again. If you want to come back, refresh yourself, or you're welcome to share the video, like and subscribe, to allow friends and family to hear these things as well. If you have things you would like to learn about, I would love for you to tell me. Feel free to leave that in the comments, or you can contact us through phone and email on our website to let us know what's an informational webinar you'd like to hear about. And definitely invite you to go look at our Facebook page and see the videos that we've done for the last 6 months or so. Thank you everyone for your time today. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Take care and God bless.